Hello, my name is Elder Gerard Williams with Unity Fellowship Church Movement, here pastoring a church locally in the city of Buffalo. This is my foray into the social media atmosphere. I just felt a strong uh, inclination or leading of the spirit uh, to kind of wade into this social media platform, mainly because there are so many voices in the world and rarely as I peruse through my various social media platforms, do I hear or see a really, or what I believe to be a really progressive voice speaking on the issues and the situations of our day. So, in my prayer and meditation, I kind of have heard that uh, I feel some measure of calling or responsibility to kind of stick my foot in the pool, wade in the pool, and see what the Lord will do. So this is it. This will be my introductory kind of video on this particular platform. So I'm just going to kind of jump in from time to time. I hope to be posting more of my thoughts and more of my meditations and my prayers, primarily so that there is more of a liberated voice, more of a truly progressive voice, more of a social justice based voice um, in the ether. So it's October 3rd, and we're on the other side of the trial where the officer who shot uh, both and Jean has been found guilty, and she's gotten her 10 years, which in my mind is a fairly light sentence for the murder of an innocent man in his home. But it seems like the general conversation is not just around the amount of time that she has received, but also around this unusual display of compassion and forgiveness shown to her by the judge uh, and apparently by one of the officers of the court, and particularly by uh, both in Jean's brother and father. So the general response that I have seen has been uh, a reflection, a condemnation, and a reflection kind of a thing, where that level of forgiveness, so called, is indicative of individuals enslaved by Christianity, and it's a mindset that does show a level of empathy for, we're using the term colonizers these days, and empathy for our oppressors, and I get that. What I don't think is lifted up is that we understand and agree that people of African descent are not a monolith. I would wager to also say that individuals who identify as Christian are also not a monolith. And that particular type of forgiveness is not indicative of all Christians. And that's why I felt the need to kind of put this out there and make this video and just kind of put it out there. I understand, the dynamic. But if I was to be a waging man, a betting man, I would wager that the number of Christians who operate on that level of forgiveness is fairly small. Um, I can't give you specifics. That's just kind of like an intuitive type thing. I don't think when we're talking about Christians forgiving, I don't think the general consensus is, particularly for African Americans, that forgiveness also means showing compassion for the people who murder us, the people who oppress us. And here's why I say that. I've learned that real forgiveness, true forgiveness, is about the individual and not about the transgressor. It is about allowing that individual to not be held a slave to their past experience or the trauma of what has happened, and not really contingent upon what the transgressor has said or done or whether or not they have repented. And so you don't have to be a slave to whether or not they have repented in order to forgive them. However, it is an internal thing, it's an internal dynamic. It does not require a public display of forgiveness, compassion, or empathy for our oppressors. That's the part that at least in my mind, I'm not that type of Christian. I do believe in forgiveness and I know the power of forgiveness. But I also understand that there are times when I have to forgive individuals within the solitude of my prayer life and just kind of be mindful of, okay, well, I'm releasing myself from that pain and that trauma, but nothing in my faith walk then declares that I must go to them and make a public show, a public display of that forgiveness. It's like asking, a woman who has raped, who's been raped, and the rapist is brought to trial, and asking the woman to then go hug her rapist and say, "I forgive you." It just boggles my mind. I don't get that. I'm not that type of Christian, and I don't believe the majority of people of color who identify as Christians are that type of Christian. So that to me is indicative of individuals who have to prove their worthiness with this so-called public display because they don't already know that they're worthy. And their forgiveness is not solely an internal work, but an external show. And that I understand why individuals who, are not particularly of the Christian faith, or those individuals who believe that, Christianity is an element of white supremacy that seeks to oppress people of color, that then validates that particular argument. But again, I believe that's a small demographic of individuals who call themselves Christian. That's just like my personal belief. I don't know anyone in my sphere, in my circle, who operates on that level. Well, currently, as I go through making these videos and I tell more of my stories, I will acknowledge that at one point I may have been that type of individual whose faith walk required so much of an external display, which is already problematic in and of itself. So I just kind of wanted to begin this introduction to this particular platform by making it clear, one, that all Christians are not monolithic, and we're not all on that same wavelength. And there is power to forgiveness, but that is an internal work. That is a private dynamic. The family could have forgiven her in the solitude of their prayer life. And the reason I say that is because had she been found not guilty, had she been acquitted, would they still have forgiven her? That's the question I'm begging to answer. Would they still, if the jury had declared her not guilty and they were getting ready to release her from the courtroom and from the courthouse, would the family have gone up to her and said, "I forgive you"? That's the part I need an answer to, because that is extremely, to me, uh, problematic. If you can't answer that question for me from a place of integrity, then I question whether or not this so-called forgiveness that you're showing to this woman, I question the integrity of it. And I know that sounds problematic because you should never question something like that, but maybe sometimes you should, particularly when individuals decide to make a public show of it. When you make the decision that your spirituality requires this public demonstrate, such an outright, over the top public display, maybe it ought to be questioned. Maybe we ought to be asking some critical questions around, explain to me the specifics and the dynamics of this particular type of faith. So that's just food for thought for this moment. There'll probably be more to come. God bless you. Remember, God is love, and love is for everyone.